What were some of the ways that you learned to survive emotionally, even if they weren't healthy?
I would have all of these like mental concessions of, I'm only going to bring this amount of money. I'm going to keep my wallet in the car. I'm not going to bring my debit card in. None of that stuff ever worked. I remember going there back in June of 2012, placing my last bet where I only had $300 to my name, lost it in about 5 minutes, and decided then and there that I was not going to live to see 26 if I continued down this road. I don't think I know how to do life. Like, I don't think I ever got a manual. Once you place that first bet, you almost have this like crash where you're all of a sudden like, oh my God, what did I just do?
A flash of regret?
Yeah, immediate regret, like clarity almost, where you're like, oh, what am I doing to myself again and again? Because addiction keeps you so hooked. It was so hard to remove myself.
What if I told you that hitting rock bottom isn't the end, but the beginning of something more powerful than you imagined? Today's guest, Patrick Casale, went from gambling addiction and emotional shutdown to building a life centered in truth, community, and unapologetic self-acceptance. And the twist, he had to completely rewrite everything he thought he knew about himself to get there. Make sure you hit follow and subscribe, whatever your platform calls it. Because the stories we tell here aren't just inspiring, they're life-changing. This isn't your average recovery story. It's a roadmap for anyone who's ever wondered, am I allowed to take up space exactly as I am? So buckle up, because this is going to change the way you see yourself and what's possible. Patrick Casale, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you here. And I'm really pumped about all the things that we're going to talk about today. There's just a full spectrum of your story is just so, man, when I was going through all of my notes, I was going through all of my notes. Let me just tell you that. So I want to dive head deep.
Let's do it. Open book.
Before we get into everything you've created now, can you take me back to the beginning of your struggle, when things really started to unravel?
Yep. So really, I think it was about 2003, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. It was right before I went to college, and my stepmom had passed away from brain cancer. And during that time, I experienced a lot of grief and loss, and I was noticing, like, would be going to my friends' houses to play poker, like recreationally or socially. And I was always the person was like, why don't we play for more money? Or like, why don't we play again once it's over? Or if I lost, it would completely ruin me for the rest of the night. And I started noticing that, like, why is nobody else experiencing this, the intensity that I am experiencing? And then it started turning into like convincing my friends that we should drive 3 hours after playing poker together to casinos where you could gamble at 18 years old and spend all of my money in like a matter of hours and rinse, repeat, do it again. And I just noticed that unraveling, like following me into freshman year of college. I went to college in upstate New York, in Plattsburgh, New York, which is a miserable place. Talking about cold, -40, like winter that never leaves. So just a breeding ground for
you're really selling it.
Massive depression. And my best friend who I went to college with, actually, trigger warning for your podcast listeners, died by suicide my freshman year. And that is really where I noticed like things completely kind of came off the rails for me.
Had you, before that, had life, how would you have described your life previous to this?
Chaotic. My parents got divorced when I was very young. It was a very volatile divorce, so grew up like bouncing around from home to home, and honestly, like, I was a troubled kid. I sought it out. Like, I looked forward to doing destructive stuff, and had a friend group that definitely did not help me in that regard at all. And we just did a lot of dumb, impulsive stuff that, looking back, I think you'd say like, oh, young white boys doing destructive stuff, that's just part of growing up. And it was just so much more than that. And got into substance use really early in my life, mainly alcohol.
How?
Probably like 12-ish, where we would just, steal alcohol from one of our parents, and that would be our entire weekend. And that just kind of intensified throughout high school. I played like varsity soccer, but in reality, I never went to class. We were skipping school all the time, drunk all the time, like gambling constantly. It was a mess.
Even now, because I know then you probably wouldn't have had the ability to have insight into describing what you were feeling on the inside. But now looking back, could you describe what you were carrying on the inside?
Yeah, I just felt like lost. I always felt different. I always noticed that I didn't really feel like I belonged, even in my friend groups or on the soccer team or in general. And I would constantly like have this existential dread or this feeling like all of the time where I just noticed, I don't think I know how to do life. Like, I don't think I ever got a manual. I feel kind of like alien-esque. And there always felt like there was just something missing.
I can relate to that. Can you take me into what gambling actually did give you at the time?
Yeah, massive amounts of dopamine. You know, not to sound cliche, but like it's almost like a slot machine, right? You pull the lever, it's exciting. You get that short little burst of excitement and kind of felt alive. I could go to the casino or I could play poker with my friends and I could risk not only my money, but honestly, a lot of times my safety, because I did some really dumb stuff back then. And it just made me feel like I was alive, like I was a part of something.
So it was pure stimulation you were seeking. It wasn't like because people do it for all different, like numbing, escape. Escape was probably part of it, you know, but soothing. But it sounds like everything you just described to me was all about like the seeking, like chasing the stimulation or the high.
There was a lot of sensation seeking for sure. And there was absolutely like numbing and escapism, especially after my friend died. I think it was the only thing I could do to like cope, because a lot of people probably would have turned to drugs, alcohol, whatever. I just would get lost at the casinos like until 5, 6 in the morning by myself. And I would drive up there alone in the middle of the night through the North Country of New York. And I also think the process was a big part of it. I always noticed, like looking back, that it was like this buildup of this experience, of this like rush. And it was the process of convincing myself I was going to go to the casino, how to find the money to do it, speeding like the entire way there to get to the casino. Once you place that first bet, you almost have this like crash where you're all of a sudden like, oh my God, what did I just do? And then you're kind of in it and you can't get out.
When you say that first crash, you mean like a moment of a flash of regret?
Yeah, immediate regret, like clarity almost, where you're like, oh, what am I doing to myself again and again? And then, you know, because addiction keeps you so hooked, it was so hard to remove myself. I would have all of these like mental concessions of, I'm only going to bring this amount of money. I'm going to keep my wallet in the car. I'm not going to bring my debit card in. I'm only going to stay for 30 minutes or an hour. None of that stuff ever worked.
So from the outside, to someone who hasn't struggled with that, how you've described it to me just now sounds pretty chaotic. Mm-hmm. But would you say that there was a sense of control you felt when you were there?
Majorly, yeah. Control was a big part of it, like just feeling so out of control in life and being able to control the environment, being able to control the rituals that went into gambling, like wild stuff. Like I know that if I was like speeding to the casino, my mind would immediately start going like, okay, when you get in there, what number are you going to play on roulette? And then I would look at my odometer and I would say, whatever is on my mileage is the number that I'm going to play, and or the speed sign that I pass, I'm going to play that number. And it was just...
Would you remember?
Oh yeah. Wild associations for that in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a pretty good memory?
I do. I have a really good working memory for stuff like that. I have horrific facial recognition. Like if I ran into you in public, I would look at you like, who the hell is that? But memory wise, yeah, I can remember childhood best friend phone numbers and stuff like that.
Oh my gosh.
Serves me no usage at all.
I'm the exact opposite. Well, no, I remember faces, but details and the things I really need to remember. No, anyway, I won't go into all that. I would appreciate a little bit more memory in my brain, but so you've shared publicly that you experienced great loss within that narrow window of time.
Yeah.
Could you dive a little bit deeper about those experiences?
Yep. So when I was in high school, my stepmom at the time had breast cancer. So she then got a double mastectomy. The breast cancer turned to brain cancer, and things kind of intensified really quickly. But then somehow, through radiation, chemotherapy, whatever, it began to regress, and she was in remission for almost 2 years. And but then it came back with a vengeance, and that was when I was a senior in high school. And I remember she was like talking to myself and my 4 sisters, like saying her goodbyes. So it was really anticipatory grief, because it was always inevitable. And I remember being at a party in high school at the time and getting a phone call from my dad, and my friends and I were all out drinking. And he was like, well, you need to come home. Marianne is dead, and you need to come home immediately. And I was like, okay, who's like the most sober person here to drive us home to my house? So dealing with that, and then, carrying that into freshman year of college, and just really struggling with my identity, really struggling with feeling very out of place in the world and very confused about what I was doing. And
can I stop you right there for just a second? And I don't mean to interrupt your flow of thought, but this is a very curious thing for me personally around mortality and death. Because we're talking about things that shaped you, and this was very significant. Was she the closest person? So I'm trying to keep everything, all the timeline. So she was the first and closest person to you that passed away, and the timeline you were very involved with. And so, how would you describe, now looking back, the narrative or messaging that started to get written and hardwired into your outlook on life with that?
I think I became like very cynical because she was such a good human, and it was one of those things that kind of jades you a little bit, because you're like, why would this happen to this person? And my family, we didn't talk a lot about it. My dad, I love my dad, but he's not the most emotionally like healthy human. And we didn't really have a lot of discussion about this. And, going off to college, I kind of just felt very alone and untethered in that way. And then when my best friend died by suicide that my freshman year, I didn't have a place for that grief. It hit me so hard. And it's one of those experiences, where you think you're supposed to see it coming and prevent it, kind of blame yourself in a lot of ways. Felt a lot of guilt around that experience. And yeah.
Now, I know what you meant by saying that, but I want to kind of ask you, when you say see it coming and prevent it, you're talking about the suicide, but were you also talking about the grief associated with it?
Yeah, because I didn't know what to do with those emotions. And I thought I could have handled it differently, even at 18 years old, and just kind of feel so guilty. He was my roommate in college. So I'm like, how did I not see this coming? How did I not take anything more seriously? I just felt very much responsible for that outcome.
How do you think that grief stirred up emotions with you and shaped the way that you connected or didn't connect with people?
I think it fragmented everything. Like everything felt so disjointed after that. I was very much a loner growing up and very much in college. So once that happened, I just really alienated myself and isolated myself from everybody around me. And I think there is truth to like suicide contagion, where you start to become suicidal yourself, and it starts to kind of spread because you're around it. And I do remember actively being suicidal at that time, like sitting on my bed in my home and my dad coming into the room and being like, I can tell that you are not doing well and I cannot handle any more loss right now. So I need to know if you're going to do something. And I just remember being like, I really don't know how to answer that question right now.
I'm sure he was doing the best he could.
Yeah.
But that, knowing what I know, working in the field, probably wasn't the most helpful piece of narration at the time. And I'm laughing out of irony, not because it's funny.
No, for sure.
Full reverence for this story. And I just want to say that. But I wonder if you would describe for me, because sometimes I like to pause for a second and really ask anecdotally, like you say, I pulled away from everyone and I started to isolate. And then you describe the suicidality contagion for you. But what did pulling away in isolation look like? You were doing this, then you stopped, and it became this.
Yeah. I mean, I was playing a lot of soccer. I stopped playing soccer completely. I noticed that drinking intensified like through the roof. I spent a lot of time alone. Like friends would invite me out to go socialize or do something, and I wouldn't even respond. I spent more time by myself in like casinos of Akwesasne, New York, and Montreal, Canada, than with people that I knew or cared about. I probably spent 5 days a week in those casinos.
Did they know you by name?
Yeah, there were definitely dealers who would like smile when they saw you. Oh, it's good to see you again, or what? And it's such a weird environment. It's so, the only way I can describe those places is just disgusting, and it's like predatory, and the way it's set up is really psychologically manipulative to like overstimulate you on purpose. And it was hard. It was a hard time in my life.
That once I don't want to go there yet, but I hope that I remembered it, because you're talking about getting overstimulated, and that's making me want to ask so many questions right now, but we're not at that part of the interview. Okay, so what were some of the ways that you learned to survive emotionally, even if they weren't healthy? Did the strategies feel like strength at the time, or did they come with a cost?
One strategy was workaholism, and it was like out of necessity because my gambling took off so badly that I needed money. So working in restaurants and bars in college was survival for me. That way you got some socializing, you got some connection, you had some people that you were like friends with enough to check in with, a place to go, like a place to be. So I spent 50 to 60 hours a week working in college, and that was definitely a saving grace. Another thing that I would not call a healthy coping mechanism was I joined a fraternity because I needed to have like community and camaraderie, and that was definitely not a healthy period of my life, but I needed that for survival in those moments. So those two things were definitely coping skills. And then otherwise I would say like things that I did were, I tried therapy. I tried 12-step meetings. I tried a lot of different.
Was this pre-graduation, post-graduation, or both?
It was like from the first year of college in 2004 until I graduated in 2008. I was kind of constantly, that combination was my life. Nothing stuck though, like SAIOP meetings are, I'm sure y'all talk about that on here a lot, but substance abuse, intensive outpatient, individual therapy, 12-step meetings for Gamblers Anonymous. Like I knew I had a problem very early on. And I think that's the challenge with addiction, is like knowing how destructive it is and still not being able to stop. I was constantly aware of that.
Did you successfully complete your IOP every time that you would do it?
No, I would go to like 1 or 2 sessions and never go back. Most people couldn't relate to the gambling piece. So it was always like me alongside a lot of people who are using IV opiates or whatever other narcotic. And I was just, there was no relatability for me aside from the fact that like a lot of the behaviors were the same for sure.
True, but you were never sent to a program specifically for gambling?
No, couldn't find one. And we searched and searched and searched when it got really, really bad, and we just couldn't find anything. And I would just keep running into people who just, I think that's so important, you know, with addiction work, is the relatability aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, as someone who is also an addictions therapist now, fast forwarding to present day, people want to hear the disclosure and the story so that they know that you get it. And that's just one thing that I could never find.
It's one of the reasons why we do this show.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like I say all the time, one of the things that saved me in early recovery were hearing people's stories, but I also always felt like there's just always been this unspoken need, like you're supposed to rush to get to the solution. And I never identified, I wouldn't say I never identified with the solution, but, you know, we're here because of what we went through.
Yep.
Not because of, we're also here because we found a solution. So
sure.
Yes, there's both. But I think there's a lot of power in the storm.
For sure. I 100% agree. And that's just something I couldn't find. I couldn't access. Like, people would be like, go talk to this therapist or go to this 12-step meeting about Alcohol Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, a lot of it is the same and it's also not the same.
Yeah.
And that was always the hardest part. And I think for gambling, for those of you who are listening who might experience this, gambling is tricky psychologically because there is no substance involved. So it's like one of those things where the rest of the world is saying, why don't you just stop? Or how come you can't control it? And because we have legalized gambling in so many states, you kind of go down this extra shame path where you're like, it's not a substance, it's legal. These are things I should be able to do and control. And this has such a hold over me that it is destroying my life. And it's a mind. Can I curse on here?
Yeah.
It's a mind fuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, and you know, I'm so glad that you're bringing up the fact that, because this happens all the time. And here's the thing. If all you have as far as 12-step is concerned near where you are is a specific 12-step meeting that, you know, for support group, go to what you can go to, mm-hmm. You know, use what resources you have. But I also I really appreciate that you're speaking to the differences, because as you're talking about how you're driving, you know, between 1.5 to 3 hours, anticipating, thinking about the numbers, all these things. I'm drawing the parallel for when I was in that place of mine for alcohol addiction, which was when I got what I needed to buy, because at the height of mine, it was, you know, I'm in college and needing to, you know, buy my like $16 bottle of handle
sure.
of like cheap whiskey.
Right.
And so, yeah, I could tell you about what happened on that 5-minute car ride to the liquor store. But, you know, when you start talking about the way grown adults who are employees are interacting with you, and, you know, all the things that are happening that are like, I don't know. It just, I would say that when it got bad for me, I didn't want the person selling the alcohol behind the counter to recognize me.
Right.
Did you care if they recognized you, if the dealer recognized you, or did you like going to a dealer that you knew because you either associated them with winning or losing and you'd avoid certain dealers?
It's a great question. Definitely avoided certain dealers for sure. Had just like that energy of like, oh, this will be bad. Yeah, I think the gambling component, right? Like, because you know that what you're doing feels like kind of wrong. And I will just say there's a lot of stereotype about gambling in general, and it felt like sleazy. It felt dirty. Like I felt awful about myself. And you're in these rooms where people are chain smoking cigarettes. Everyone's there not talking to another human, kind of in their own world, losing money. You see people like go through the highs and lows of like losing and winning. It is truly terrible. It's I cannot describe it enough. But I do think there was a component to what you're saying where if a dealer who I liked or someone I knew that was a regular noticed me and interacted with me, I did get like a little bit of a perk up a little bit to be like, oh, see, this is why I'm coming here, because I am a part of this community. Like I went to underground poker rooms in college with a friend of mine who bartended alongside me at an Applebee's in New York. And it made me feel good that like he would text me and be like, we only have room for one more tonight and I got your name on it if you want to come. Like I would be like, yeah, see, this person's looking out for me, not this person wants my money and all of my stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't see it at the time for sure. So what did numbing look like for you at its peak?
That was like in situations where I felt so flat and it didn't matter how much money I spent, won, lost, just could not access that feeling of feeling like alive and just completely dissociated, like out of body experience type of stuff where you're like almost like looking at your true self or your present self and you're like, I'm not even a part of this. Like I don't even exist in this moment. And you know, I would be sleeping 15 hours a day, waking up, go bartend for 4 hours, go to the casino, rinse, repeat over and over and over again. And it was just awful. I felt like a shell of a human being. And I definitely did not recognize myself anymore.
Was there a moment where you realized you hadn't felt anything in a very long time?
Yeah, weirdly enough, like I was at the casino one night and I always had these ridiculous rituals of how I would play certain games. And I won, like, I played 3-card poker. I sat down, I put like $10 down. I immediately got a straight flush, which pays out 40 to 1, won, you know, $400 right off the bat. And I feel nothing. I'm like, I wish I would have put more money down. Like, this is awful. Why did I just do this to myself? Stuff like that. Or just being in relationships with people where I would be dating and women all the time would tell me like, you're not present, you're not available, you don't actually seem happy to be a part of this. And it was just like, yeah, it's kind of every day of my life.
When you look back at that time now and the long running patterns, what do you see that you maybe couldn't see back then?
In a very, very, very traumatized, grief-ridden, undiagnosed autistic ADHD human who had absolutely no guidance, no support, and no understanding of themselves.
You were experiencing huge amounts of shame.
Yeah.
Was there a point where shame became its own kind of addiction for you?
I don't know about that, but I know that shame was the most like emotionally painful experience that I had during that time. And I think that gambling addiction and shame go hand in hand because there's a lot of lying and manipulation and hiding the bank account or overdrawing and not being able to pay your bills again or having to ask people for money. I remember vividly dating someone in college, and during Valentine's Day, I had spent all of our money gambling and I couldn't afford anything but to like go to the takeout like Chinese buffet together. And stuff like that just created so much intense amounts of shame where you were like, I think that's why there's such a correlation between gambling addiction and suicide, because of the shame that comes with the experience.
Yeah. Well, and the reason why I worded it the way I did, and typically I think we don't hear shame addiction, but because we know it's like a cycle, especially the narrative. And so I'm curious, what was the most damaging story that was cycling that shame was telling you about yourself?
Oh, that I was, that I was worthless, that I was a horrible human being, that I was never going to get out of this hole that I had dug for myself, that all of my relationships were failures, and that I didn't deserve to be here anymore. That was kind of like a constant pervasive thought pattern.
How did fear around money or not being enough influence your choices?
I think you're always trying to like prove to yourself that you are. And a lot of that comes with reckless impulsivity. And money, stress, and struggle has always been a trigger for me. So there's always this thought in your head, and it's completely irrational. If I win more money, or if I win X amount, I will finally be able to be done with this. And there's never enough money in the world. I came to that conclusion where I was like, I could win the lottery and I would spend 2 times of what I win. And that thought pattern was just like an epiphany moment, but also the reality that I am trapped in this. Like, I cannot get out of this.
Even before you knew you were neurodivergent, did you feel pressure to pass as normal?
Yeah, I think like as someone who was definitely a very high masking human, noticing as I've learned to unmask all of the ways that you have to conform and like contort yourself to be a part of, and how when you feel so different all the time and so alienated and alone, there's like a desperation to fit in and be and belong. I think as human beings, we want belonging and connection. And feeling like I never came authentically or naturally in situations where I would either have to over rely on alcohol to even be a part of the conversation, or to at least allow myself to be present. I don't make a lot of eye contact, as you can tell already in this conversation. I would force myself to do that. You almost script in front of a mirror, like, this is how I'm going to act in these environments. Someone nods their head, I nod my head. Someone smiles, you smile. If they laugh, laugh. Like, you learn these behaviors, and they are so unbelievably exhausting that it leads to intense amounts of autistic burnout. But not knowing what that is at the time, you kind of are saying, what the hell is wrong with me? Like, why can't I come home from socializing or connecting with your friends and I immediately have to like collapse and I can't function for the next, 2 or 3 days, and just didn't understand it.
It's interesting hearing you explain it this way. I understand so much more every time I hear more stories and I talk to more people and I hear more research about the spectrum, why we now call it a spectrum rather than just autism. And so I'm curious about how you just described that. You had this internalization of wanting to mirror what other people were doing. I know that how would you appropriately refer to someone who is higher on the spectrum or farther to the right, or? Yeah,
so a lot of people still use like functioning labels, which we try hard in the autistic advocacy spaces to like kind of move away from. So I would use like low support needs, moderate support needs, and high support needs.
Okay. That is very helpful. So someone with higher support needs, I would say in the past, I've known to be described as that they needed someone to impart to them and say like, hey, you've got to know that this is not how other people are functioning, to assimilate into society, yada, yada, yada. I feel like I'm butchering how that would be. I'm sorry. I'm doing my best.
That's okay.
And so did that never happen for you? That was all your own interpretation. I feel on my own, you felt the difference.
Yeah.
But you didn't necessarily know why you needed to respond the way you were responding. You just knew that you wanted and needed to feel like you were fitting in.
Yeah, for sure. So I would probably be considered someone that you would call like low support needs, what we used to refer to as high functioning, and a high masker for sure. So I got really good at like assimilation and camouflaging and chameleoning.
That's a word. And yes, you can.
Yeah, becoming a chameleon in situations, kind of like, oh, I'm noticing when I act this way, people like me more. Or when I do this thing, I am included more. You learn that really early on. But as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, without that understanding or without someone to help model behavior or talk about the why, that's why I think so many of us feel so alone, because you're like, I am noticing this massive feeling in like difference or disconnection, but I don't understand why, and I don't know what else to do. So, and I've noticed the only way to be included or a part of is to do things this way.
Gosh. That makes my heart it tugs at my heart so much, because I think about how many people are in that same spot right now and have been. And especially, oh my gosh, the undiagnosed adults out there that are just, there are a lot that I want to go just give a hug and be like, I know, great, this is so inappropriate, I would never do this, but you know what I mean? It's
painful. It's painful to hear and experience and to empathize with. I also think there's so much intersectionality, right, within the queer community, with the autistic ADHD community.
I was going to say, as you're describing the masking, also when I was doing my interview with her, it's so interesting for me because I've never sat down with somebody who so closely described what my being a queer person growing up was like. I mean, like, so many parallels.
Yeah.
And
it's like feeling different, defective, broken. What is wrong with me? And then having to mask to be safe and to fit in and to not draw attention or be perceived. It's exhausting.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take a quick second and mention for our audience. So please listen up. If something in this conversation is hitting home, do me a favor and follow the show. Drop a comment or share this conversation with someone who needs it. These stories save lives, but only if people hear them. So let's keep making healing louder than shame. This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admissions center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help. All right, so moving on, can you take me to the moment that you realized something had to change? What cracked open that first window of possibility?
So I remember being in Ireland when I was younger with my parents, my dad and my stepmom and sister and brother. And I snuck out of the hotel room by myself and went to this casino in Galway by myself. I'm 18 years old. Only had 100 euros. Never even thought about how will I get back if I lose this money. Anyway, I won like 15,000 euros in this casino. And I go back. I can see your expression, so... Yeah. Yep. I never crosses my mind that the person that owns this place doesn't have to give me this money. Like, could have hurt me. Like, lots of things could have happened and gone wrong. So I go back to the United States with this money. I immediately think to myself, aha, I will never gamble again. I have enough money to pay off all this debt. And I promptly drove to the casino in Montreal 2 days after I got back to college and spent all of it in about 2 or 3 hours. And the devastation that comes with like hitting those rock bottom situations and just acknowledging what you have just done to yourself and your situation is unbelievably painful. And you have enough of those moments where you keep on like building on them. This will be the last time if this happens. This will be the last time. This will be the last time. That was one of those times for me where I was just like, holy shit, what am I doing to myself? And once you start having those like light bulb moments, even if you're still continuing gambling, drinking, whatever, you're still becoming more aware of the fact that you want this to be done. So I remember graduating college back in 2008. There are no jobs because we're in a major recession. I am engaged at the time to this woman I'd been dating in college. We break up. I lose my job and I start selling cars, which was awful because I know nothing about cars and I just know how to talk to people. And I'm gambling hard and spending money that I don't have. And I decide impulsively that I'm going to move to Asheville, North Carolina for a year. And I'm going to get my life together. And I'm going to get away from all the people, places, and things. And I'm going to figure things out. So I moved to Asheville impulsively back in 2011 with no plan, no job, no friends. And I just rent an apartment. And that was right around when the Cherokee Casino said, we're going to install live dealers into the casino. And I was like, great. It's an hour away. I can do that all the time. I remember going there back in June of 2012, placing my last bet where I only had $300 to my name, lost it in about 5 minutes, had that same gut-wrenching feeling of what the hell did I just do to myself, and decided then and there that I was not going to live to see 26 if I continued down this road. So I spent the entire 2-hour drive in the middle of the night through the mountain just thinking about this, and I have not gambled since.
What do you think made that moment different from all the others?
I think it's just like moment after moment after moment, you know, like rock bottom experience. This is falling apart. This is falling apart. You're pushing away all your friends and family. Your relationships are failing. You can't keep a job. Like your mental health is crumbling. And enough is enough. Like I had tried all the things, you know, like in and out of Gamblers Anonymous, lying to my sponsor constantly. And it just, everyone has that light bulb epiphany moment at different times. And I don't know what it was. I think it was just a compiling 7 or 8 years of hell. And I was just like, I deserve to live a life where this is not my reality every day. And I just never have gambled since that time.
You talk about a lot of secrecy, masking. I mean, like, you know, all the stuff that I can identify with from either being queer or you know, my own chemical addiction. That's along with that comes so much like secrecy, like you said, pulling away from people, lack of trust of anyone. Was there anyone or anything that helped you to start moving out of those patterns?
Yeah, weirdly, like my dad enabled the hell out of me because I don't think he knew what else to do. So he would just throw money at it. Like I'd say, oh, I just overdrew my account by $5,000. Or, oh, I just took out multiple private student loans through Sallie Mae and cashed all of them and took the money and gambled them away.
You can do that?
Yeah, it's really fucked up. You can do that. So I took out almost $100,000 in private loans through Sallie Mae when I was in college, and my tuition was paid for already. So I came out of school with $100,000 in debt, and he helped me pay off all of that. And then I kept gambling. And then he said, I can't help you anymore. And I think a lot of us can relate to those moments where your last support line cuts you off.
Was this at that same time?
Mm-hmm. And he was like, go move to North Carolina. I can't support you anymore. I don't know what else to do for you. And it almost feels like you're like a lost cause at that point in time. But I think sometimes we need that like, I don't have any other options and I have to figure this out.
Do you think if he hadn't done that, you would still be, if you had still had that lifeline from him, do you think your life would have changed the way it did?
It would have been a lot harder. I mean, I had some periods of abstinence and sobriety, and during those times you do start to see life get better. So your brain does kind of make that correlation as that time increases every time you have that momentary like blip. But then you relapse and you fall even further. But your brain and your body do still remember like life was kind of better when you weren't gambling. So I think I maybe could have gotten there, but I don't know if it would have happened as quickly. And, you know, I definitely can't say it for certain. There's a strong possibility that it never happens. So I definitely owe him for that.
Looking back at the time in your life when you were in the thick of addiction, burnout, and emotional overload, did it ever feel like something deeper was going on beneath the surface that even you couldn't explain?
It's a good question. I mean, yeah, looking back for sure. And in those moments, I always felt like even with all the therapists that I'm going to, all the work that I'm doing, I feel like something is missing, like something is not clicking. And that came with like multiple misdiagnoses, mental health wise, throughout that time period, endless amounts of like antipsychotic medication that never worked.
Let me ask you on those two things, because that happens a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things that I think is important to speak to so people don't feel alone.
Yeah.
And they don't give up.
Yep.
So when you got misdiagnosed and or were given medications that didn't work, what did you tell yourself?
Well, it's like there's a duality. It's like, oh, this is going to fix the problem. I finally figured it out, as well as like, there's something really wrong with me. So I think it's a both and I would tell myself both of those things. And I understand why I was misdiagnosed. Like impulsivity off the charts, like family history of mental illness, like, you know, substance use, gambling, all the things. I understand why the psychiatrist was like bipolar disorder, OCD, major depression. But never once in any of those times did autism or ADHD ever come up. But I want to just say that there is nothing wrong if you get prescribed medication and they work and the diagnosis fits. Like, that is not a sign of weakness. I think that's a lot of people's first thoughts is like, it's weakness. There's all the stigma. I don't want to talk about this stuff. Like, there's a lot of shame still in 2025 about mental health and addiction.
Oh my gosh. I've shared, when I tell my story, because I had to start taking mental health meds many years, more than that, into my recovery journey, and fully convinced that I knew that my diagnoses were what they were and that I needed them to have peace, because I have severe like panic and anxiety. There was just this whole like shame, whatever. Anyway, this isn't about me, but my whole point is I can so relate, even being someone that people look to and they're like, but you know, you speak this all the time. And I'm like, I know it makes all the sense in the world and I can tell you to do it.
Yep.
But even me.
Oh yeah.
And it was, I mean, like to be giving talks and saying all these things publicly, and yeah, it's still, you know, at home being paralyzed or, you know, out because I wouldn't follow through with what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. And it took me a couple years before I could start being med compliant.
Yeah.
You know, and
I think we want to resist it so bad, you know, because it's almost like acceptance of, okay, there's something wrong with my brain chemistry.
Well, and then for those of us also that have an addiction history, taking anything there can be such a difficult. So both of those things I think were battling for me. Mm-hmm. And so that's such an important piece that you just spoke to there. But the other one that you were kind of teasing out was the whole part of getting a misdiagnosis and or being put on a medication that doesn't work, because there's something, and everybody gets a different message that goes into their brain at that point. Like, okay, well, I have this diagnosis, and then being told, no, it's something else.
Yep.
What did you internalize? If the medication wasn't working and you're told you need to take something else, or the diagnosis was found to be not correct and you needed a new one?
There is something wrong with me and I will never figure it out. That was constantly the thought. And you kind of get into this point of cynicism where you go to a new doctor or a new psychiatrist and you're just like, you are not going to be able to help me. Like, there's nothing you're going to tell me that I haven't already heard. Yes, I've tried mindfulness. Yes, I've gone to therapy. Like, yes, I understand sleep hygiene. Like, and you just kind of get to this point where you're like, I'm never going to figure it out. And I think that is what so many people struggle with when that stuff happens within our medical system, which can really be not affirming or supportive in so many ways. And you really just want to give up on it. Like, you just want to wash your hands of it.
Why didn't you?
Because I am stubborn, probably, and very resilient. But I think that the more and this is like looking at it through a lens now of late in life discovery of autistic human, deep diving and analyzing and researching everything. So like during those times, I would be doing that as well. And I'd be like, okay, of course this medication didn't work because this diagnosis isn't right. Let me try again. And then you build rapport with maybe a therapist or a psychiatric provider, and you really do build trust. And all of a sudden, you're more open-minded to the conversations that might be taking place.
So tell me about that time when you did get the information that turned the light on, flipped the switch, and...
Yeah. So when I moved to Asheville, I stopped taking all those antipsychotic medications because I was like, this is not helping me. And weirdly, I was like, oh, I'm fine. Like, I feel better than I have in years. So I found a therapist who had their own history of gambling addiction. And we talked a lot about my history and everything that I'd gone through. And I was like, okay, someone finally gets it. This is really cool. Oh my God, they have a master's. They're a therapist. They have a private practice. There are possibilities here. So that was definitely like one of the first most helpful relationships. And then, if we're fast forwarding from there.
Did you have, I want to ask you here, did you have not only, because what I just heard was you had two versions of hope. Mm-hmm. One being that you saw the possibility for healing with somebody who could finally see you and understand you, and another being someone who was successful and had their life together, but had also been where you were.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's why I think it's so important as like treatment providers, therapists, etc., to share their stories and to have disclosure on our websites about you get it.
Yeah.
Because it's so important to create that light at the end of the tunnel for someone who has gone through most of their life thinking there is no possibility, there is no outcome, there is no option, there is no future. Because if we don't have hope or feel like there is a future to look forward to, what is the point? Like, what's the point of recovery? What's the point of abstaining? What's the point of healing? So having that installation of hope is huge.
For someone who suspects that they might be neurodivergent but feels afraid to name it or explore it, what would you say to them from your own lived experience?
I I've always been a proponent of talking about the hard stuff because I think it helps normalize it for other people. And I would just encourage you to think about like all of the times that you have felt different or alone or disconnected or weird or like an outcast or an alien or any of the labels that we so often hear. And just know that there are people out there who get it. And there are communities of people out there who understand the way your brain works and are supportive. There's so many resources now, and we haven't even really scratched the surface. You know, autism and ADHD are definitely hot topics, right, in like social media and the world in general. But that's really only over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. Like, we really don't have an enormous amount of information, even still to this day. And I think it's just so crucial for us to figure out who we really are, because that's where we really embrace our identities and our authenticity and feel like our true selves.
Yeah. How do you feel about, have you watched the show Love on the Spectrum?
Mm-mm.
Have you had the conversation with other people about it and like theorized about like whether or not you think do you have an opinion about the show?
It's so hard for me to make an opinion because I haven't seen it, but you know, just talking about it with other people that I know, I would say they would definitely say, oh, it feels really endearing and oh my God, it feels so sweet. But I think there's a lot of like minimizing and magnifying autistic experiences, and what we don't want is for it to feel like there's a binary. You know what I mean? Like the autistic experience is not binary. It's not black and white. And there's so much individuality. So we want more awareness and acceptance and advocacy and information, but we also don't want to typecast and ensure that every quote unquote autistic person is the same.
That's obviously very important, but I love the way that you just put that. That helps me understand. I think it's important for people who don't struggle with, or I don't want to say struggle, or that don't deal with spectrum, being on the spectrum. I want to be a good person, and I love having relationships and learning about people's different experiences in life and what they deal with. So learning about this is very, I mean, I appreciate so much that you're sharing this. What did healing actually look like for you in the beginning? Not the polished version, but the real messy day-to-day stuff most people never see.
Missing a lot of appointments, feeling really bad or guilty for doing so, being charged late cancellation fees by your mental health therapist and getting really frustrated with them and not understanding why they were doing that to you when you canceled on them 10 minutes before the appointment started. A lot of relapsing, a lot of messiness, a lot of trying really hard, but constantly feeling like you're like coming up short, and just doing everything in your power as a human to try to distance yourself from things that were unhealthy, but acknowledging simultaneously that you are a human and you are going to make mistakes and you are going to kind of fall down multiple times, and you get less and less harsh on yourself, I think, sometimes as you go through your healing journey, because I used to beat the hell out of myself for relapsing or doing something destructive. And then in reality, like being able to give yourself some self-compassion of like, it wasn't a great decision, but you are a human being and you are deserving of recovering and healing and growing. And I think that I just tried so desperately to figure it out. And I just give myself grace for that, because I didn't know what I was doing. And I just knew that life had to be different. And I really just wanted to try everything in my power to change my life around. And sometimes that meant like missed opportunities or failed situations, and that was okay.
Were there any routines, people, or decisions that helped anchor you in those early days?
I definitely think like having some solid relationships of people who hold you accountable and check in on you. And, you know, even when I was in Gamblers Anonymous, having people who would reach out ad nauseum, relentlessly calling you to see if you're okay, Things like that were pretty helpful early on, especially. And then the person who I was dating at the time was very supportive, and having those people who were like trying so hard to see you succeed. And I think that also is hard when you fail or make a mistake or slip up, because then you feel even more guilty or more shameful because you feel like you let them down as well.
So you just named it right now, feel. Do you remember the first time that you really started to feel something again, like joy, grief, anger, instead of numbing it?
Yeah, I think it was like, I think when I moved to Asheville and I stopped gambling, I was finally able to like access emotion again. And then I realized very quickly that I feel too much all the time, and you almost want to numb that out. Because as someone who, like we were talking about before, is overstimulated fairly regularly, you like, can I turn the notch down a little bit on this? Do I really have to feel things so intensely all the time? But
okay, so math that out for me.
Mm-hmm.
So call back. So when I was like, I want to talk about this so much, but I got to wait till the right time. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, you're talking earlier in the episode about how you were like, it was so much stimulation. I was chasing that and
Yep.
How was it then that it was okay? And it was a reward for you, but then at this point it was no longer.
I think it's a masked and unmasked version of self. So before, when I was masking and I didn't really understand myself, I was chasing the excitement, I was chasing the exhilaration, and I was willing to put myself into really precarious situations to have access to it. If you fast forward to now, I do the exact opposite and try to avoid it at all costs, because I know what it does to me mentally and physically. So, when you're in it and you're addicted to something, you're going to try as hard as you can to find as much access to those things that give you that exhilaration or that feeling or that sensation. And a lot of times we are chasing things that are really unhealthy for us too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's, I really appreciate that explanation. Because this is really powerful. What tools, practices, or like unexpected habits became lifelines for you in recovery that helped regulate your nervous system or reconnect you when everything felt overwhelming?
I need structure and routine a lot. So I really had to ensure that I didn't have a lot of free time in my day for my mind to wander or to go elsewhere or to make impulsive decisions. I needed to surround myself with people who I could be honest with. I remember vividly to this day coming home to someone I was dating, and I had just gone to a coffee shop and I drank my coffee on the way home, and she asked me when I got inside, "Did you get anything?" And I was like, "No." And I noticed how natural lying was in that moment. So then having to own that and have accountability with people and just be like, whoa, why did I just say that? Like, that was not truthful. And really trying to hold myself accountable with people that I cared about. I spent a lot of time playing soccer. Physical activity is so important, not only for that endorphin rush, but for social parts of your life, for dopamine. Like, it is so good for you to have any sort of physical activity on a consistent basis. I admittedly never went back to GA or Gamblers Anonymous after I left New York. But I know for a lot of you listening, like 12-step is really important, or smart recovery is really important, or having structure in meetings and accountability and routines are super crucial. So I also look at recovery in not a black and white way where I don't think there's a one size fits all approach.
And that's especially, I personally believe that to be an important perspective, regardless of what kind of healing you're talking about, what kind of addiction you're talking about, but especially in process addictions.
Yeah.
Because it's just the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had to give myself
put it like one size. I mean, you're just gonna fail.
Yeah. And when you do that, then it does create that narrative of like, see, this is why I can never get better. This is why I can't recover, or why I don't try.
You help so many people overcome imposter syndrome, but what does it sound like in your own head when it shows up, and how do you respond to it now?
So I remember when I was like, this is back in 2020. I'm a therapist, just to give some context and foundation. I'm in private practice at the time. COVID hits, seeing so many people telehealth wise. And I'm like, this is great. I live at home and I can just work from home. How amazing for me. And very quickly got bored of that and overwhelmed. So I started making videos. I used to help therapists start and grow their private practices, but I would do it for like coffee, lunch, whatever. People would say, you should do this for a living. And my immediate reaction would be like, why would anyone hire me? What do I have to offer that nobody else is already doing? And that was always my instant response. Full of self-doubt, perfectionism, etc. So I started making videos back during the pandemic talking about imposter syndrome. Facebook Lives, nobody's watching. I have no audience at the time. The only person commenting is my grandmother, who's like, your house looks so good, or the dogs look so happy. And I'm like, get out of here. It's not what this is for. But I realized then, like, the more I talked about my self-doubt, my struggle with taking risks or betting on myself, so to speak, or growing outside of my comfort zone, the more you put it into the world, the less it has control over you and how you move forward. And I started to like just name it, say it out loud. Like, I'm going to try to do this thing. I'm going to try to create this idea. And of course that imposter syndrome or self-doubt showed up immediately. But I think all of the work that I've done over the last 5 years, it used to drive the car. It used to steer the ship. And now it's like asleep in the back seat. It still exists, but maybe it's in like a child seat. Maybe like I can turn the music up really loud. Maybe I can tell it to be quiet. I'll usually use different language than that. But in reality, like, I like to acknowledge that when we are growing and we are stepping out of our comfort zone, self-doubt should exist. It's protective. And there's a part of our brain that's like, you're taking a risk, step back. But if we acknowledge that and allow for it to just be there, and we don't allow it to dictate how we move forward, it allows us to pursue things that we never thought were possible. If we go back to when I was gambling back in 2011, there's no chance in hell I think I'm sitting here talking to you about this story in 2025.
And now you've created global retreats and spaces that center connection and authenticity. Why do you think community has been such a vital part of your healing of you and others like you?
If we're looking at it in addiction, I always think addiction is the opposite of connection. And I do think that as human beings, we want connection and community and belonging. Like, that's integral to our DNA. And I realized as an autistic ADHD human being who feels different in most scenarios and settings, I wanted to create something where people could come, be their true version of themselves, unmask safely. If they want to pace, stim, fidget, not look at you while you're talking to them, whatever it needs to be. And I realized there's a really deep correlation between professional growth and personal growth in that way. And travel is the perfect catalyst, because travel is a risk. There is a risk of getting on the plane. There's a risk of like things going awry. It's uncomfortable to step into a room of people you don't know. But by doing those things and doing it as a group, you're kind of showcasing that we are normalizing this experience and this behavior. These fears are valid, but if we're all having them and we're all supporting each other, that's how we overcome these things. So I just wholeheartedly believe in that.
Heck yeah. There was a time when you didn't think you'd make it to 30. Today you're helping people build lives they thought were out of reach. What's it like to reflect on that contrast?
You said that so casually. Like, that's funny. Yeah, there was a time I didn't think I was going to make it to 26. So I turned 39 in August. I feel very old now. I like to do like timeline exercises because visually it really helps me, especially when I'm experiencing self-doubt, shame, I'm not doing enough, whatever is coming over my brain in that moment. And I can say, okay, if I was in active gambling addiction back in 2011, stopped gambling in 2012, zoom out even further and see like all of the things that I have been able to do since that time. It makes me, I don't feel proud of myself a lot. I don't feel pride in the accomplishments that I've had. And that's just a constant work in progress. But I can at least acknowledge the significance of them. And for me, I think that's really important because I want other people to be able to see that as well. And when I say things like, I never thought I would own 2 businesses or own a group therapy practice, employ 25 people, do a TED Talk, get a book deal, create retreats and summits, have podcasts, like never in a million years would I think that. And it really has all come from just putting it all out there, being really raw, authentic, vulnerable, and normalizing the stuff that we don't often talk about, because I think that is so humanizing to talk about all of the stuff that we feel so shameful and scared about all of the time.
Yeah. Well, and I think just to add to that is that the work that you're doing is helping close that gap of this misnomer that society has just like told us for so long, that there's this huge realm of what normal is, and the work you and so many others are doing are closing that gap to show people, that's really, normal's an illusion, and really what you're even thinking about is it's so much smaller.
Yeah.
And people find hope in what you're doing. And
Thank you.
If someone's listening right now who sees themselves in your past, what's the one thing you want them to know?
Don't give up, that you're worth it. Even when everything in your being tells you the opposite. I can vividly remember standing in Beacon, New York back in 2009 or 10, playing soccer, thinking, I am never going to get out from under this. Like there's never going to be a future for me. And I just remember how painful that was to really believe that. And I think it's all about just that resiliency to not give up and to put yourself first and to do everything in your power to change that situation around. And to be honest, like you're still going to get triggered 13 years in. Like I was in New Orleans and I saw a sign for a casino, and there was a part of me that was like, I could definitely walk over there right now and nobody would ever know. And you just have to know that those moments do pass too. And those also help strengthen your resolve and your recovery process as well. So just don't give up.
So when the noise gets loud, mm-hmm. or old stories try to pull you back, like what you were just talking mm-hmm. about, what brings you back to your why? You have to give yourself 10 or 15 minutes to really get through that moment, to get through that urge, to get through that trigger. What do you use to get through it?
I think about everything that I could lose. I think about my 10-year marriage. I think about myself. I think about the life that I've created. Everything would be gone in the blink of an eye. And sometimes that means calling a friend or someone to talk and just say, hey, I'm really struggling. Can you stay on the phone with me for 15 minutes? And there's a lot of research that shows that you just have to beat that 15-minute urge. Speaking of Asheville, I told you about driving here, and when I drive home, I will pass the casino that I spent my last bet in 2012. And there is going to be an urge in that moment where I'm like, I could go in there and use my business debit card and nobody would know. And that is a time where I already proactively will call my wife, have that planned, talk for 15 minutes, get through that feeling, and then just moving through that is really a part of what I do.
Thank you for sharing that. All right, my last question for you here. If one person out there hears your story and it changes their life, what part do you hope they hold on to most?
I think if you're feeling different, which we've talked about a lot today, that you are just not alone. I think that is so important, with whether it's neurodivergence, whether it's addiction, whether it's the combination of the two, whether it's identity, that you are not alone. And to just anchor into that anytime things get really, really challenging and really painful and really overwhelming. And Yeah, I think that's what I would want people to take away from that.
Patrick Casale, thank you so much. This has been such an honor.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you to our audience watching and listening. I'll remind you, as I always do, it's never too late to start loving yourself, and you're always only one decision away from a completely different life. If this conversation stirred something inside you, don't scroll past it. Share it with someone who needs to hear they're not broken, just misunderstood. Make sure you're following Rooted Recovery Stories and leave a review wherever you're listening. And if you're ready to dig deeper, binge the full series. We've got over 200 episodes that prove transformation is possible. This show isn't just for entertainment. It's here to remind you that healing is real, and so are you. This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admissions center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.